She was barefoot in the snow when he found her, arms curled around her belly like she could hold in the life leaking from her skin. Her lips were blue, her eyes fluttering open only when the shadow of his horse covered her broken body. She didn't speak right away, just blinked at the man above her like maybe he was a final vision sent to ease her passing. But Chaska dismounted without a word and knelt beside her, his breath fogging between them. Her dress was torn, ribs visible through frostbitten skin, and her wrist, twisted, swollen, purple. She had no coat, no boots, just a satchel clutched under her body as if death itself couldn't pry it from her. When he reached for her hand, she tried to speak. Nothing came but a croak, and then a whisper so faint it could have been wind. He leaned closer. Her lips brushed his ear, and the words she managed to push out stopped his breath cold. He took the baby. That was all. Then her body gave out, but Chaska was already wrapping her in the heavy buffalo cloak from his saddle. Not because she'd asked, but because something in her voice wasn't just desperation. It was unfinished. He lifted her like a bundle of reeds and mounted again, pressing her against his chest to share heat, to keep the dying part of her at bay just a little longer. The trail back to the winter camp was 2 ridges east, but he veered south instead, toward a hidden hut his grandfather once used for fasting. Safer, quieter. And if she didn't make it, the wind would carry her name with dignity. He didn't ask who she was. Not yet. He only laid her down in the warmest corner, stoked fire with his own breath, melted snow between his palms to wet her lips, and waited. Hours passed. Her body trembled in cycles, fever rising, then falling like a tide. The satchel never left her grip. Even unconscious, her hand locked around it. Only once, near nightfall, did she stir again, long enough to gasp another word. "Wagon wheel." Then silence. Chaska didn't sleep. He didn't pray either. But he stared at the door like the snow might whisper back, like somewhere out there in the white was a man who had taken her child and left her for dead. And now that her voice had reached someone, it would not go unanswered. By morning, her fever had broken but left her as pale as the snow outside, her breathing shallow, eyes fluttering like a candle flame about to die. Chaska crushed elder root and pine needles into the broth, fed it to her in slow spoons, and only when her fingers twitched open did he dare unwrap the satchel she still clutched. Inside were 2 things: a torn strip of baby's blanket, soft, blue, stained with something old and red, and a small, leather-bound Bible with the name Grace Alcott scrawled on the first page. He whispered the name once, testing it like it might wake her. It didn't. That night, her eyes opened fully, wild and unfocused, but alive. "The baby," she croaked. "He said he'd keep him if I died." Chaska moved closer. "Who?" Her lips trembled. "Harlan Bishop. He said I owed him for the wagon ride. When I begged to rest, he tied me to a tree, took the baby, said I was too weak to follow." Her voice cracked, and her eyes filled. "He left me to die so he wouldn't have to share the food." She coughed, then tried to sit, but Chaska's hand pressed her gently back. "You're not dead," he said, "but he will be if he kept his word." Her eyes widened. "You'd go after him?" Chaska didn't answer. He simply added wood to the fire, then stood and went outside. In the snow beside the hut, he knelt and pressed his palm to the earth, then drew a circle in the snow with one finger, his people's way of calling clarity. That night, he sharpened his knife and mended his saddle straps. Grace spoke only once more. "I don't know if my baby's even alive." Chaska turned then. "You said he'd keep the baby if you died." "Yes." "Then you're alive, so he'll come back. Or I'll find him." It wasn't a promise. It was a decision. Grace tried to understand him. This man with dark eyes that said more than words. She'd been a stranger in too many places. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to explain her pain. Chaska saw it, understood it, not with pity, but with purpose. By the third night, she could stand with help. "Why are you doing this?" she asked as he packed supplies. He looked at her, then at the satchel, then back again. "Because you whispered, and no one else heard." Then he mounted and rode into the snow, following the trail of a man who thought he'd stolen from a ghost. The trail was faint, but not invisible, hoofprints leading west, shallow tracks of a light wagon, and the occasional drop of something dark in the snow that hadn't frozen clean. Chaska rode alone, bow slung over his back, knife at his side, senses sharpened like teeth. He didn't ride fast. He rode right, pausing to listen, to read the language of bent branches and scattered ash where someone had built a fire too hastily. He found the first true sign near a half-frozen stream. A baby's cloth diaper, soaked and stiff. Folded carefully, not dropped, not abandoned, kept warm. That meant the child was alive. That meant Harlan hadn't killed him. Yet. The knowledge steadied Chaska's breath but darkened his thoughts. A man who could tie a woman to a tree and take her child would not treat that child with kindness. The next night, he found the wagon, tipped sideways in a ditch near a frozen bluff. Smoke still curled from its chimney pipe. He dismounted quietly, approached on foot. Inside, through a crack in the canvas flap, he saw a fire, a pan, and one man. Broad shoulders, tangled beard, gun on his lap. No sign of the child. Chaska waited until dark, then crept closer. A soft whimper broke through the crackling wood. He turned toward it. Behind the wagon, wrapped in fur and tucked into a crate like freight, was the child. Alive, barely moving. Chaska didn't hesitate. He lifted the crate gently and stepped back into the trees. But the child whimpered again, louder this time, and a voice boomed from the wagon. "That you, girl? I told you." The rest was swallowed in a shout as Harlan stumbled out, rifle raised. He didn't see Chaska, not until the arrow hit the snow inches from his boots. The man froze. Chaska stepped into the firelight, silent as the night, his face unreadable. "You," Harlan spat. "You want a hers?" Chaska didn't answer. He held the baby close and pointed to the trees. "Go, west. You've got until I count to 3. "You threatening me, Redskin?" Harlan sneered. "This baby's mine now. She owed me." Chaska took one step forward. The look in his eyes said everything. The next arrow wouldn't miss. Harlan hesitated, then laughed bitterly, lowering his rifle. "She ain't worth it anyway." He turned, staggered back toward the wagon, muttering curses. Chaska didn't watch him leave. He wrapped the child tighter, touched the boy's cheek. Warm. Alive. Then turned his horse back east, carrying the baby toward a mother who'd whispered into snow and been heard. Grace saw him coming before she believed it. The snow had lightened by morning, and she'd hobbled outside with a branch for support, staring into the blank distance where the trees met the white horizon. For hours, nothing moved, until a figure emerged through the frost like a dream drawn from her own ache. Chaska, walking beside his horse, not riding, cradling something wrapped in furs against his chest. Her knees buckled before he reached her. She didn't cry. Not at first. She simply dropped to the snow as if the pain holding her upright had finally been lifted. When he knelt beside her and placed the bundle into her arms, her fingers trembled so violently she could barely open it. But then she saw his face, red from cold, eyes squinting blindly, one mitten missing, and her heart cracked open. "Eli," she whispered. The baby stirred, opened his eyes, and blinked slowly as if recognizing her through some fog of fear and memory. She pressed her lips to his forehead. "Mama's here," she said. "Mama's here." Chaska stood and backed away, giving them space, but Grace reached out. "Wait," her voice caught. "What happened? Did he—" Chaska shook his head. "He left." "Just like that?" "He knew someone was watching now." She studied Chaska's face, the blood on his knuckles, the tension in his jaw. "You didn't kill him." He said nothing, but she knew. And somehow it meant more than if he had. The next few days passed in a strange kind of peace. Grace barely slept, holding Eli like the world might steal him back at any second. She nursed him through cracked lips, fed him broth drop by drop, whispered songs her mother once sang in a house long buried in Missouri soil. Chaska built more firewood, hunted enough rabbit to feed a family of 4, and didn't speak unless she asked. But when he sat nearby, sharpening his blade or watching the fire, she felt safer than she ever had in a church pew. One evening, as the baby slept between them, Grace asked the question that had lived inside her since that first night. "Why me?" Chaska didn't look away from the flames. "Because when the snow swallowed your voice, it still reached mine." She leaned back, holding the child closer. "No one's ever listened to me before." He finally met her eyes. Then they were deaf. The fire snapped between them. Outside, snow began to fall again. But this time, Grace didn't shiver. For once, the cold didn't win. Someone had walked into the storm for her, and come back with everything she thought she'd lost. The cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a beginning now. Grace moved carefully, ribs still sore, but her steps steadier with each day. Eli clung to her side like he knew how close he'd come to being lost, and when Chaska entered from hunting, the boy reached for him without fear. Grace noticed the way Chaska's large hands supported Eli like he was glass, the soft grunt he gave when the child tugged his braid, the stillness in his posture whenever Grace spoke. She wasn't used to being heard, not like this, not without interruption, not without someone planning what to say next before she'd even finished. She tried to ask more about him, where he came from, who raised him, but Chaska answered only in pieces. "I was the second son," he said once, "not the one expected to lead, so I listened more than I spoke." Another time, "My mother could braid sweetgrass so tight it would hold through a storm." Grace held on to those fragments like warm stones in her pocket. She wanted more. She wanted to know how a man raised with such care ended up alone in a hunting shelter, rescuing strangers from the cold. But she didn't push. Instead, one night, as snow fell soft against the windows and Eli slept curled between furs, she offered a story of her own. "My husband died in a mine collapse," she said quietly. "I was 3 months pregnant. They gave me half his pay and a sack of flour. Said that was fair." Chaska looked at her but said nothing. She went on. "I tried to sew, tried to teach school, but no one wants a widow with a crying baby. Harlan offered me passage west, said he knew a place where widows could find work. I didn't know I was the work." She looked down at her hands. "When he took Eli, I begged God to send someone. I didn't expect it to be you." Chaska stood and added wood to the fire. His voice was quiet. "I was fasting that day, seeking a vision." She looked up. "Did you get one?" He turned slowly. "You." The word sat between them like a question and an answer. Grace felt heat rise to her face, not from the fire but from something deeper, something long buried under grief and frostbite and fear. She whispered, "What are you going to do with us?" Chaska stepped forward. "Not what? Where?" She blinked. "Where?" He knelt beside her and placed a hand over Eli's small chest. Someplace no man like Harlan will ever touch again. The place he spoke of lay beyond the second ridge, past the black pines where elk fed in silence, and no white man dared settle. Chaska called it Tokala's Hollow, named for his uncle who'd vanished there during the Great Starvation, but left behind a stone cabin built with his own hands. It's been empty since I was a boy, he said, but it waits. Grace didn't ask how a place could wait, but when they reached it, Eli bundled against her chest, snow crunching beneath the mare's hooves. She understood. The cabin stood tucked into a crescent of earth like it had bowed down to cradle the living. One door, one chimney, no windows to the west, only a line of woven reeds stuffed between crevices to keep out the cold. Chaska opened the door and stood back. Yours now, he said. Grace stepped inside and felt the air change, not warmer, not safer, just right. She set Eli down, let him crawl across the pine needle floor, then turned to Chaska. Why here? He looked around. Because this land belonged to a warrior who died protecting children not his own. His blood's in the soil. That matters. Over the next days, they made the hollow livable. Chaska repaired the roof. Grace tanned rabbit hides and stitched curtains. Eli laughed again. His tiny voice echoed against the stone like the beginning of a hymn. There were no visitors, no horses, no wagons, only wind and trees and the quiet rhythm of 3 people learning each other's breath. But silence was not absence. It was healing. One afternoon, Grace asked if they were safe. Chaska's answer came slowly. Men like Harlan don't forget what they lose, but they don't come here without cost. She nodded, understanding what he didn't say. You'd fight? I've already chosen my side. That night, she couldn't sleep, not from fear, but from the rising question that had taken root in her chest. What am I now? Not a widow, not a victim, not just a mother, something else, someone new. She watched Chaska sleep beside the fire, his body relaxed, breath slow. Eli curled against his leg like a pup. And in that flickering glow, she whispered not to God but to herself. This is my family. She didn't need a ceremony or a preacher. She didn't need permission. She just needed that moment. The next morning, she braided her hair like her mother used to, tight, proud, unshaken. When Chaska looked at her, something unreadable passed between them. Then he said softly, You look ready. Grace nodded. I am. The thaw came early that year, loosening the grip of snow before February had ended. Streams sang again, birds returned to the branches, and the air smelled less like survival and more like possibility. Grace took to walking the edge of the hollow, Eli on her back, collecting herbs Chaska named, and roots he showed her how to cure. Each task was small, but everyone added a layer of ownership to the life they were building. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Still, even in the warmth of new routines, a shadow lingered. She saw it in Chaska's eyes when he returned from hunting later than usual, in the way he scanned the ridges before setting down his bow. One evening, she asked directly, Is he coming? Chaska didn't answer at first. Then, low. I think he already has. That night they extinguished the fire early. Grace pressed Eli close as she and Chaska lay on opposite sides of the room, both awake, both listening. Around midnight, she heard it. One snap of a branch, too deliberate to be the wind. Chaska was already up, arrow nocked, eyes fixed on the door. But no one came. The next morning he found tracks, boots, one pair, circling the cabin once, watching, waiting. Chaska followed them for miles, then returned silent and tight-jawed. He wants you afraid, he said simply. Grace's mouth went dry. Will you stop him?" "I already did once," Chaska said, "but now he wants you to believe I won't again." That day, Grace took action. She walked into the clearing behind the cabin, lifted her chin to the pines, and began building something from fallen branches and twine. "What is it?" Chaska asked. "A fence?" "No," she replied. "A marker. For him." She placed the bundle of blue cloth, the piece of Eli's first blanket, on a carved stake and planted it firmly at the edge of the clearing. "He doesn't get to haunt us anymore. He doesn't get to take up space in here." She tapped her chest. Chaska watched her, quiet. Then he stepped forward and placed his hunting knife beside the stake. "If he comes, he'll see we've already buried him." It wasn't a literal grave, but something deeper. A message. A line in the earth that said, "This life is claimed, this woman is not alone, and this child has two parents now. One by birth, one by oath." That night, Grace kissed Eli's forehead and whispered, "You're safe." And for the first time since that wagon ride west, she truly believed it. Word traveled slower than wind, but faster than fear. By the time March sun touched the hollow, someone had seen Harlan in Deadwood. Drunk, loud, showing a torn baby bonnet like a trophy. "Said he had a wife who ran off with a savage," the man told Chaska when they crossed paths near the trading post. "Said he'd find her again and take back what was his." Chaska didn't respond with anger. He simply bought more salt, more flour, and returned to the hollow with quiet urgency. Grace saw the change before he spoke. "He's close," she said. Chaska nodded. "We won't run." That night, he taught her to fire a bow. Her first shot missed the tree entirely. The second stuck in bark, trembling. "Not bad," he said. "For a preacher's daughter." She smiled, but the nerves beneath her skin coiled tighter with each lesson. They prepared the cabin like a fortress. Shutters reinforced, food stored, escape paths marked. Grace made Eli a sling from rabbit fur so she could run with him if she had to. But somewhere deep inside, she hoped she wouldn't. She hoped to stand. To end something. Days passed with no sign of Harlan. But the silence felt wrong now, like the calm before a prairie fire. Then one afternoon, while hanging laundry, Grace heard a branch snap. Not a soft crack from snowmelt. This was a boot, a step. She turned slow and steady, and there he was, Harlan, dirtier, meaner, eyes yellowed from drink, rifle slung low, grinning like he'd won. "There you are," he said. "Thought I might have buried you too deep in that blizzard." Grace didn't flinch. "You left me tied to a tree. You broke our deal. You don't get to rewrite the rules just 'cause you got lucky." He stepped closer. "Where's my son?" "Not yours," she said firmly. "Not anymore." He raised the rifle. "You think he'll remember you? A squaw's toy and a liar?" "No," came a voice behind him. "He'll remember who saved him." Chaska stepped from the trees, bow drawn, arrow aimed dead center. Harlan froze, laugh dying in his throat. "You again?" he spat. "You always hiding behind a woman?" Grace stepped beside Chaska. "Not hiding, choosing." Harlan raised the rifle, but too slow. The arrow hit the snow near his feet. Chaska didn't miss. He warned. "Leave," he said. "You have no claim here, no name, no place." Harlan looked at Grace, then Eli in her arms, then at Chaska's steady hand. And for the first time, he backed away. No curses, no threats, just silence. The kind that meant he knew he'd already lost. Spring came hard that year, mud swallowing boots, winds tearing at cabin seams. But inside the hollow, something rooted deeper than weather. Grace no longer walked like someone bracing for pain. She moved with intention. Chaska watched her one morning as she scrubbed clothes in the stream, Eli chasing shadows nearby, and said, You've changed. She looked up, blinking sunlight. Number I just showed up to who I was. He smiled, rare and quiet. They spent that day planting. Grace sowed potatoes near the stone ledge. Chaska taught her how to layer ash for warmth beneath the dirt. Every movement, every task, felt like a claim, a declaration that life was being chosen, not just endured. That night, as they watched the fire curl upward, Grace turned to him. Are we just waiting for him to return? Chaska shook his head. We've already moved past him. If he returns, he'll find an empty place where fear used to live. She nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time. For what? To speak it. Chaska tilted his head. Speak what? She turned toward him, voice calm but resolute. That this us, it's not just survival, it's home. For a long moment he didn't respond. Then he stood, walked to the saddlebag, and pulled out something wrapped in deerskin. A necklace of woven sweetgrass and bone, carved with the symbol of Weepa, the meadowlark, a bringer of good news. My mother gave this to me, he said. Said I'd know when to pass it on. He knelt before her, didn't speak a vow, didn't ask a question. He offered. Grace took it, heart pounding, and placed it around her own neck. Then I accept, she whispered. That night they didn't speak of futures or fears. They simply existed together, not bound by paper or town decree, but by something far older. Truth without shame, love without condition. In the days that followed, neighbors began to trickle into the edge of the hollow, an old Lakota couple bringing dried berries, a trapper who knew Chaska from his youth, even a Comanche woman who said nothing but placed a carved eagle feather outside their door. Word had spread, not just about the woman who survived a snowstorm, but the life that had risen after. Grace took Eli's hand as he toddled toward the garden. See that? She said, pointing to the sprout pushing through rock. That's how we grow, even here. He laughed, a bubbling sound that rose into the hollow like a promise. And when Chaska stepped out with his hand outstretched, Grace didn't walk. She ran into it, like someone who finally knew where she belonged. They built their final home not of stone, but of cedar, stacked beam by beam at the eastern edge of Tokala's hollow, where sun touched the windows first. Chaska carved designs into the frame. Birds, deer, a mother and child in profile. Grace painted the inside with wildflower dye, the walls blooming even in winter. It wasn't a cabin anymore. It was theirs. By summer, Eli was chasing frogs barefoot through the stream, while Grace taught him the Lakota names for each flower. Chaska tended a smokehouse he'd built from scratch, humming as he worked, the low sound threading through the air like a heartbeat. They had no clock, no church bell, no neighbors shouting orders. But they had rhythm. They had peace. One morning, a letter arrived from Deadwood, carried by a trapper. Grace didn't open it for 2 days. When she finally did, her hands shook. Not from fear, but memory. It was from a preacher who'd once blessed her wedding to the man who'd sold her soul for a drink. Word reached us you survived, it read. Some wonder if you were taken against your will. I would ask only this. Did you find peace? Grace didn't write back. She took the letter to the fire and watched it burn. That was her answer. Months passed. Then a year. On the first spring morning of their second year in the hollow, Chaska returned from a nearby ridge with his arms full of wild lilies. For you, he said. Grace laughed, brushing hair from her eyes. What's the occasion? You said once no one ever gave you flowers, he said simply. She touched the petals, then his cheek. No one ever stayed long enough to know I liked them. That evening, they held a ceremony. Not with guests, not with vows, but with Eli standing between them and the eagle feather still resting near the door. Chaska pressed his forehead to Grace's. "In my tongue," he said, "there's no word for wife that means possession. Only the word Wayuthecha, the one I shelter beside." "Then that's what I am," she said, "and what you'll always be." As stars flooded the sky above Tokala's hollow, Grace stepped outside alone for a moment. She looked at the woods, the stream, the hill where the marker still stood. She whispered, "I survived you, Harlan. And I became someone." From behind her, Chaska's arms wrapped around her waist. Eli's sleepy voice called from inside. And Grace smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't just relief. It was victory. She hadn't just been rescued. She had rebuilt. And the woman who'd whispered for help in the snow had become a name spoken with strength. Grace. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen her there, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.